And we are live, so I'm going to see. There you go, folks are joining us in the chat. Folks joining us in the chat. Just gonna try to give a second to let the chat get. I see we got 104 folks. There we go. Everybody back. Got 104 folks and climbing. Y'all burning up the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with two really quick questions, but I want you guys to put your questions in the Q&A box. And so what I'm going to do is go back and forth between the Q&A box. So I'm going to ask two questions. And then I want the bulk of the questions to be from you guys. So let's get started. So one of the things that I noticed from you guys' patient that you all had a worth of information of past promotional material for a controversy. And what I found was that it seems that Warner Brothers was more than willing to promote Controversy, an album that really was in 1981 a controversial album. Yet they were very less likely to promote much of Prince's work, say mid-90s and later. And so, well, early 90s and later. And so just going around, and I guess we'll go in the order of the presentation. So Brother Daniels, you first, then Fullwood and Fullwood, and then Brother Hoskins, and then Brother Cruz. So going to order. So why, and I know it's an unfair question for you guys because you're not Warner Brothers, but why do you think Warner Brothers was more than willing to promote Controversy in 1981, but not to do so much so in the 90s?
Well, I guess looking at it from what critics might have perceived, at that point, each and every record was starting to get more critical acclaim. So I'm guessing from an executive standpoint, probably figuring that they leverage, what people were saying after catching this live acts, or, really kind of seeing the broader, bigger picture of what was possible. Now, it didn't necessarily transition or translate to commercial sales off the bat, but I just think, maybe this is me going a little far, but just kind of looking at the fact that most of the reviews were really positive, they figured that at some point that they could build off of that momentum and then turn that into success. So I'm guessing it's just more to do with the criticism that came, and most of it was in the favor of Prince and his music.
All right, very good. Thank you so much, Brother Daniels. Brother Fullwood?
I agree with Christopher, and I would add this, that I think Prince was an investment. There was a time when record companies nurtured artists for a number of years they thought had promise, and with that critical aim, I think that they were hedging their bets that this guy was going to blow up one day. I think about what Jill Jones's mother said to her, I think in 1980 when Dirty Mind, she was like, that guy's going to be a big star one day. Right. And because of Prince taking of those risks, he continuously was in a space for himself, a very unique space that no one else could occupy. You liked him, you didn't like him, he was there. And he was being supported by growing press. It wasn't always there, but it was growing after a while. So yeah, I think they were hedging their bets. And then, by the time 1999 came along, it was clear. It was clear.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Brother Hoskins?
Yeah, I think what Stephen said is exactly right. I think it's, at that time, they were willing to take a loss on Prince because they knew it would, or they were confident that it would pay off later. And I think part of why we see, I guess, so, from my conjecture for the other half of that equation, I think after Purple Rain, there was probably some frustration on the label's part that Prince wouldn't just take the ball and run with it. It's sort of like, well, we gave you this massive success. We gave you a movie when you didn't, when you had no prior experience. People barely, white people barely knew who you were. Gave you this feature film. Like, we let you build this studio by yourself, and now you're off making, these psychedelic rock records and like black and white 30s comedies. And so I think that was kind of the source of some of that frustration was Warner's like, where is our ROI on this? Like, we were supposed to get smash after smash, and we got Purple Rain and then a bunch of weird stuff, And I think also part of it I want to give some credit to the team that was behind Prince in the early 80s. Howard Bloom was instrumental in finding that niche and saying, new wave is an area that there's an intersection between black and white listeners that we can use as a wedge to get Prince from this disco, like this damning, pigeonholing as a disco artist, we can use this new and sort of exciting form of music to drive a wedge in there. And I don't think Howard Bloom was as involved later in the 80s and the 90s. And I think it kind of shows. I think the promotion people at that time, I don't know, you know, like you said, I'm not Warner Brothers. I'm kind of just speaking off the cuff here. I think they probably didn't understand him as well and weren't as invested in him.
Thank you, Brother Cruz.
Well, I'd like to take a European approach here because we have a different timeline over here. The first time he played in Europe was early 1981. And the first they could probably promote him with a lot of the interviews done in early 81 was when Controversy was released. So that was, for Europe, that was a big starting point for the promotion of Prince. And then he grew and grew. And by the time the US wasn't that interesting anymore, the Love Sexy period, etc., he was the biggest star ever on this side of the Atlantic. So the promotion here in Europe, it skyrocketed in between 88 and 92. So that was the main focus of Warner promotion here in Europe. So I think that's a big difference with the promotion in the US.
Thank you guys so much. So the next question, I'm glad that I'm in sync here with the chat group because the next question, Rockabash, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. Actually, your question speaks to the question I wanted to ask him. So I was glad to see that all of you guys centered your presentations on an analysis of the lyrics as well as the media and imagery. And so what I wanted to do, and then I'll come back to Rockabash's more specific question about this. Can you talk a little bit about your own work and struggles as a scholar, having your friends or other scholars either take your scholarship about Prince seriously or the whole notion of scholars looking at Prince as an artist worthy of, quote, serious scholarship? And so we'll go in that order again. Brother Daniels, then Brother Fullwood, Brother Hoskins, and then Brother Cruz.
I think the biggest thing as a fan, as a scholar, and as someone who's really studied the wide range of his work, getting people past the look was always probably the most difficult. I mean, they see this little pint-sized person that's, you know, wearing bikinis in one respect, but then coming back shredding on guitar like he's Jimmy Page or Joe Perry from Aerosmith. And, you know, in one respect, you know, the same person can literally funk it up to a point where you have no choice but to dance and just to get into the groove. But one of the things that I've always tried to do as a professor, because I teach mostly 20, 21-year-olds, is to really try to link his connections to technology and his connections to spirituality and his connections to the news to maybe some of the arts that they're listening to, or maybe some of the more pertinent things that are kind of coexisting in their universe. So it's really more so about drawing connections between generations and trying to really figure out best practices to show that Prince was actually someone who was very forward thinking, but he was also very brilliant in his approach to how he created music. But even just making sure some of the subject matter that he was bringing in, like one of the things that I brought up recently to a young person, because we were talking about the pandemic and about protests and pretty much how young a lot of the protesters were over the last year that's gotten in the street. And, you know, you see them on social media really rallying, crying, and really getting these things to surface. Prince was either close to their age or not much older than them. So really seeing that he was 23, really projecting some of the things that he thought about and some of the things that he was exposed to, but then recognizing that another 20, 21, 22-year-old is literally in the street, you know, holding up picket signs and paying attention to the news a little bit because these things are affecting them. It's doing things like that to really show that this is someone who's really worthy of studying, and all of the work that he's done kind of set the tone for some of the things that we're seeing to this day.
Excellent. Brother Fullwood.
So I was thinking about your question. I'm not a Prince scholar, and I want to say that in deference to people who spend a lot of time working on Prince. I listen to Prince. I was a music journalist for a number of years, and I'm interested. So I didn't try to remember being weird as a kid. So being weird gave me a lot of space to like what the fuck I liked. So I didn't have to try to convince anybody to like Prince. Either you liked him or you didn't. It didn't matter to me because I liked him. And also, like, I think about when we scholars who Prince is so rich of a subject, him as a person, but also his music, and then also the context around Prince is really remarkable because I'm sort of preoccupied with what Prince represents at different times in the American imagination, around race, around sexuality, around gender, but also around someone who you could criticize in a variety of ways. You know, you could say, well, he stole stuff from this person and that person, Or you could, so I think you can enter his circle in a variety of ways, his Prince verse. So I'm excited about that prospect. So I have a few more pieces in me, I think, but overall, I'm not a scholar. I'm just interested. So I just go where my curiosity leads.
Excellent question. Excellent response. Brother Hoskins?
I think, in terms of like, I don't want to be too, self-aggrandizing about what I do, which is really just an extended writing project. And part of why I do these conferences is just because it's almost like a fan convention. I've never been a Star Trek person. I've never, I like comic books and geek stuff, but never enough to go be with, and all, Prince fans also smell better than those kinds of fandoms. That might be part of it. But I like the fellowship of it. So that's part of it. But I think the best thing that this kind of scholarship and criticism can do is reframe and recontextualize Prince for future generations. I've always been, I was a weird kid growing up. I grew up listening to the music that my friends' parents listened to. I've always been. So the idea of like, oh, you hear what is immediately in context is just foreign to me. I was born in 1984. I didn't really grow up. I grew up with Prince, but I didn't grow up with the albums that are really, controversy came out before I was born. And so I'm very conscious of just wanting to kind of keep this discourse going. So because criticism really creates a space for work to last beyond the time that it's produced. Capitalism, I think, keeps marching on. There's going to be the next thing and the next thing. It's about selling new products. And so I think it's kind of, if critics have any kind of higher responsibility or higher calling, it's to make sure that these things aren't forgotten. And honestly, the right criticism can do things like make that Love, Sex, and Super Deluxe happen, because we can't just let the market decide whether it makes sense for Warner Brothers or whoever, Sony, whoever, to put out these albums that we want to hear, this music that we want to hear. We have to make a cultural context that is asking for that and wanting it.
Excellent, Brother Cruz.
Oh, I agree with everything that has been said. And the thing that strikes me is that people tend to forget the things Prince has achieved throughout his life because he has done so much. The general public will always see the guy from Purple Rain or the guy from Kiss with the high heels. But he was as a business man, he was far ahead of his time. In my book, I describe how he changed the concert industry overall. The book focuses on the Netherlands, but it can be applied to everywhere. The first time in the Netherlands when people selling tickets before shows were arrested because the artist didn't want that, it was Prince concerts. First time people selling bootleg shirts out in front of concert halls were arrested. Prince concerts. He was changing that industry. The first time those concert barriers were put in place for a larger audience, a Prince concert, and that's him as an artist and a businessman. He changed a lot of things, and people tend to forget that. Also, his fight with Warner. There's a lot in the press right now because of Taylor Swift re-recording her old albums because she doesn't own her masters. Prince was well, he didn't invent that. He was trapped in that situation as well. But in all the stories in the press about Taylor Swift with her albums, you hardly hear anyone saying that Prince has done the same thing, had the same problem. So we must make sure he is not forgotten, and that's why we do this, and that's why he is an interesting subject for scholars, because there's so much to explore, and you can't do that alone. There have to be lots of people doing that because there's so much ground to cover.
Okay. Excellent. There's so many great questions in the Q&A, so I'm just going to jump around. So if I don't get to your question in the Q&A, please charge it to my head and not my heart. I'm just trying to go through and pick some of these great ones. I want to kind of tweak one a bit, because it asked about, say, material in the vault that didn't make the cut for controversy. So I'll let you answer it this way. Is there any either B-side or material recorded during that time that helps you in your scholarship and understanding of controversy that you think more people should be aware of? Now, I said again, is there any, say, B-side song or any cut made, created during that time that didn't make the country album that you think people should know about as a way to better understand controversy? And we'll go in that same circle again, Brother Daniels with you, and then Brother Fullwood.
I mean, I'm a gotta stop messing about guy. I mean, the rock and funk fusion in that is just crazy. And, you know, most of those B-sides from that era have so much energy. You can almost reimagine yourself in a Max's Kansas City or a CBGB's just living it up on the weekend. So I think that's one of those songs where I just kind of transport myself back to that time if I was just hanging out and wanted a cheap drink. And maybe I just caught Prince on the weekend and just wanted to really catch a really good show. So I think when you kind of catch him in that moment and catch that vibe from that time, Gotta Stop Messing About, probably the one song that I would go to and definitely throw out there first.
So there is something to say about nostalgia and about hearing an album for the first time and it sort of being a part of your DNA after a while. So I knew about what Gotta Stop Messing About. I don't really have it. I don't miss anything that wasn't on the album. I like the album as it is. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think great question, a great answer, Brother Hoskins.
I'm going to take this slightly differently. I'm going to say I'm super interested in the vault during this period. 81, like summer of 81 was kind of like Prince's first big burst of prolificacy. You know, this is when he started he recorded the Time album. He was recording Controversy. He started what became Vanity 6. And he was just, you know, this is like a preview of the Prince that we would see in 82, 83, 84, you know, where he was just obviously Sign of the Times era, like just constantly recording. And so I just want to put into the universe, there's a track. It's on Prince Vault. Nobody really knows anything about it. It's called Hump You. And I want to hear Hump You so bad. So, you know, and like it's probably, I know it's probably going to be a letdown. We got to hear Vagina, good, but it wasn't what Vagina in my head would. I was like the Maxwell guy in those old commercials, like getting just away. I know Hump You is not going to live up to my expectations, but I would still like to hear it.
Okay. Brother Cruz?
I'd go for The Second Coming, the song The Second Coming. It was played before the Controversy concerts, and it ties in. It ties in with my presentation, but it also ties in with the rest of the album. The Second Coming of Christ is there, but also Gun Control, which comes back to within the Any Christian lyrics. So that's a song that signifies the era for me, and it's a great way to start off those concerts. And those concerts were brilliant. They were so eager. They were so trying to capture everyone in the audience. So it's that song, and then the concerts that follow. That's a significant part of the whole Controversy story for me.
I'm with you. I can't even watch any of the video bootlegs without The Second Coming, or listen to my video bootlegs without The Second Coming. I like the concert is not complete if I don't hear The Second Coming before that. And I'll just add, you know, this may be a little off, but I love Hard to Get Your Lovin'. I mean, that's the fact that you have two versions, to me, speaks just sonically right to the different ways right? So we have time for maybe one more question. Again, I'm just jumping around. I'm going to take maybe because there's a question someone has about the LM1 drum machine, the limb drum machine. But I want to ask, because it's particular to you guys' question, I'm going to tweak the question just a bit. Brother Cole, I believe, asked a question about the rainbow children being born from Fred Hampton's philosophy. To bring that back to say controversy, right? I want you guys to just briefly think about what was in the zeitgeist and what may have come before that. What particular political ideologies do you see being articulated or executed through controversy? They don't have to be specific, but just thinking about, your own understanding of historical and political ideologies. Who or what particular types of political ideologies do you see Prince reflecting, either in a very specific or in a very general way through the album? I know this kind of putting folks on the spot, so I'll start. We'll go in that same. And our brother Daniel's like, well, I always got to go first, right? We'll start with Brother Daniels and then Brother Fullwood, and then round it out the same way.
I mean, I still go back to, just his musical integrity and the people that he looked up to. I mentioned earlier, Sly Stone was definitely a big influence. Of course, James Brown was always a big influence, but also Stevie Wonder was, someone who was always kind of connected to him in various reports. And when you think about, the sort of, musical layering and arrangement and just the subject matter that they would have on their albums and even on a lot of singles, I think a lot of that was really somewhat of the muse that Prince used. It's kind of hard to say, what journal, other than thinking about somebody like Mike Wallace or Walter Cronkite, who might have been delivering the news and Prince might have caught him on tour or something like that in his hotel. I wouldn't necessarily link him with necessarily, some speaker or some reporter or something along those lines. But I would definitely just return back to, just the musicians that he looked up to and the people that maybe he might have played with in the studio while he was making these records. I would really just kind of keep it focused on the music and his exploration there.
Very good, Brother Daniels. Brother Fullwood?
I'd take your word, Christopher, stop the musical exploration and maybe seeding his work with some of the things he was concerned about and maybe thinking about and thinking through, possibly. Mm-hmm. I got the impression that Prince was a magazine guy, and reading all those magazines. They couldn't have all been Vogue, or, some of them had to have more than that. And then also I think that Prince was, so I remember during that time, and Prince had said this before, you couldn't say God or religious stuff in songs. But then I think he decided, okay, I'm going to say the Lord's Prayer in this. Let's see where this lands. And I think that this is why I like controversy, because I think it's pushing at the margin of that, the tethers that people told him, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, or you won't be received, or what I think Mark Goodman said on MTV. If Prince was on MTV, people, what would the Midwest say? And it was like, well, the Midwest is where Prince is from. That's insane. And I remember the first draft of my talk, I actually said something around Prince looked like the guys in my neighborhood growing up when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the underwear stuff, but it was the hair and the clunky shoes, and and Prince always had a pimp aesthetic going on, So I think that, anyway, let me get back to the original point very quickly. I think he had it in his mind, and he was willing to play with it, and to distinguish himself as someone who was thinking. Because the more I think about the context, the more I need time to think about the context. Yeah,
right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Brother Hopkins.
It's hard to ascribe politics to Prince, even though Controversy is his most political album. Like I think it was Christopher who mentioned, at least until later, until Rainbow Children maybe. And I think by the time the Rainbow Children comes out and things like Dreamer comes out, you start seeing a more coherent political philosophy from him, but still not that coherent, because Rainbow Children was famously bewildering to people when it came out. So, but so it's sort of like, do I want like Ronnie Talk to Russia could be a satirical song from more of a left perspective, or it could be a little more of a right wing song, like I'm afraid of the Sandinistas, I'm afraid of nuclear war, help us, Mr. Reagan. So it's hard. It's really hard to say, but I will say I think it's interesting reading about Prince's early days. You know, came up in the way, which was a very kind of like post Black Power. You know, Prince was if you read his memoir, he was really a child of the '60s, and I think some of that like new left, even if he isn't espousing it, he's not the Clash, he's not Gang of Four, not like Doctrinaire, or you know, KRS-One. But I do think that some of that seeped in, and you see that line, stand up, organize. I mean, you know, we're getting into Marxism at this point.
Right.
I don't know how conscious Prince was of that, but it is there, and it's so interesting that it's there.
Excellent, Brother Cruz.
Well, I agree with everything that has been said, but I also think that Prince, as a person, was always someone that stood next to society instead of in the society. So he was an onlooker, and and especially when he got more and more famous, he stood more and more outside of the real community. So I think that the things he was singing about was him commenting from his point of view, and also being vague about it so that people can apply their own views to what he is singing. And that's on his political views, of course, but it's all about anything else he's singing. He's deliberately being non-specific so that everyone can relate and everyone can put their own visions on it and create something for their own.
That's the spirit of Prince calling. And so that leaves us with about 3 minutes, and I know the one thing that Professor Duff is always doing is making sure that we get these good breaks so people can move and stretch, and depending on where you are, I know it's 12:30. I'm sorry, it's 2:30 on the East Coast. It's 1:30 for me here in the South and all over the world. So I just want to thank you guys again, Brother Daniels, Brother Fullwood, Brother Hoskins, and Brother Cruz, for your not just your excellent presentations, but being as insightful in your presentations to continue what Prince was doing is creating presentations to make us think about not only our place in the hermeneutic circle, but how we are working to fashion that hermeneutic circle. So I appreciate all you guys in that. So with that, I'm going to make way for Professor Duff to give us questions getting into the break and to get you guys ready for your break, and then the round table after this.
Thanks so much, Seeley. So we are going to move our bodies and we are going to get ready for the time. We're going to get ready for the time round table. What I look forward to, I deliberately did not put Zach on the time round table this year.
I was going to say, I was going to say in the chat that I banned from all future discussions of the time.
Yes, you have. I'm glad you are aware of that. All right, I'm just kidding. Okay, so we're going to take a break. We will return at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, definitely, well, Daylight Savings Time. Take a break. Hang out at the lounge if you want to meet some people. Go to the arena if you want to look at some booths. Edgar actually has 2 booths in the arena.
I'll go to the Prince Twitter tonguebreaker. Prince Twitter thread booth right after this.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So if you want to talk to Edgar, go there. And thank you so much for this fantastic panel.